Hey guys, welcome to this final lecture in the modeling section. In this lecture, we're going to be building a fire hydrant for our final scene from the ground up. And I will say that this is sped up probably about almost 300–400%. In reality, this took about an hour, a little over an hour to build this model out. I'm basically just going to go over and explain some of the stuff that I'm doing. Most of it's going to be familiar to you guys at this point if you've been following along. There's not a lot of new commands to talk about, but there are some things that I'm going to be doing that we haven't really gone over. So I'm going to kind of talk to you about that. As you can see, just from starting off, like I've basically extruded up from a circle, just some simple objects, and just using my scale tool, made them different sizes. And that's what I'm continuing to do here. Right there, I just duplicated part of that lip and brought it up. And now I'm going to try to merge some of those vertices on the inside by going in and making them the same size. So again, there's this model is going to end up looking pretty advanced, but I just wanted to give you guys a good example of what you can do with just the tools we've already talked about. Modeling is not really complicated. It's made to seem complicated by a lot of people. Sometimes I think they do that just because they don't want a lot of other people to know how to get in there and be able to do what they do. But quite honestly, if you're willing to put in the time to learn the workflows, then modeling is really not that hard. Knowing what to model and knowing what shapes to put into an object is more complicated, I would say, than actually learning the technical aspects of it. It's a lot of repetition, a lot of kind of tedious work, but it's something that I really like because it really pays off in the end with something that you've built, and it really can turn out photorealistic, and I really find that exciting. So right there, I added an edge loop with that Control-R command we talked about. And I'm already starting to go in and start playing with the idea of putting in a modifier, because I want to see how this is going to look when it's smoothed out. I'm trying to inset some of the sections on top of this hydrant to have these little divots that go in. And I'm trying to extrude these by selecting all of them and hitting the E key and then scaling them in so that they're all kind of the same distance apart from the middle. I'm doing the same thing here. And really, it's all about blocking in, big shapes first, and then going in and focusing on detail once you've got the silhouette down and your model's where it needs to be. So I built this model for this lecture, and I want to say that it's not the exact same model you saw when you were looking at the intro lecture. That's a model that I had previously built. I'm going to give you guys both of them so you can kind of see, if you take a little bit more time, some of the more refined edges you can do and things you can add to a model. Again, this was something I was trying to build fast just so we could get a good example of a more complex model. But the other one has some more, distinct features. I took a little bit more time making sure that all these edges were perfect, and that one probably took me a couple of more hours just to get in there. And I was looking at photo reference and trying to get everything perfect. So it'll be helpful to see both, I think, and kind of play with them in your own scenes. And you guys have permission for me to use them in your own stuff, commercially or not. It doesn't matter to me. So if you guys want to use these models for whatever you want, that's fine. I would appreciate credit if you'd like to give it to me, but they're definitely yours to play with. I think what it's also important to walk away from is that I'm not using a whole bunch of commands that we didn't go over. Everything I've done is extrude, add edges, merge. There's not a lot of stuff that is really super advanced and complicated. The only reason you ever get into that kind of stuff is when you're trying to do something really specific. But 9 times out of 10, you don't need that. You just need to learn the basics. And that's how you create complex stuff. So I'm adding an arm to the hydrant right now. And as you can see, it's the same process, just extruding, scaling, moving, that's it. All from one circle that I added in the middle. Going in and putting in that modifier so I can refine these edges and get a preview for what that's going to look like. It's interesting, if you start off with something like a square and then you add that modifier, it'll turn it right into a circle. So if you add a square or a cube in the 3D viewport, and then you add a subdivision surface modifier, it's going to turn it into a sphere if you add enough smoothing, because that's just what the algorithm does. And so in that way, you can use that to your advantage to come in here, and if you want to keep things angular, you have to add more edges, as I'm doing right here. But if you want to keep things smooth, just spread things out. Keep them far apart, and you won't have those sharp edges. But the cap on the end of this arm is more of a square cap. So what I'm trying to do is go in here and edge slide these edges together to make it more of a square angular shape. And as you can see, when I get finished, the part that it's connected to will be completely round, but this cap is going to be square, and it's just removing those edges around. So extruding in and merging to cap that off, and that's it. And so because I started edge sliding some of that stuff around, it took more of the spherical aspect out of the arm that I wanted. I wanted the cap to be really square, but I wanted the arm itself to be without those sort of angles all the way around. I want it to be a cylinder. So what I'm having to do is exactly what I was talking about. I'm going to have to go in and instead of having those edges sit where they're at now, I'm going to have to scale them out a little bit so that it smooths everything back out. So there you see I'm using my wireframe, get in there and really refine my selections, and playing around with the proportional scaling, things like that, trying to get what I want. I was trying a lot of different commands, and you'll see a lot of times when you're in Blender and you're modeling, especially, even after you get proficient, it's going to take some playing around sometimes to figure out just how best to do something with the model that you're building. So what I'm doing now is there's a little piece at the bottom of that arm that allows a chain to be connected to the cap, and it's sort of like just something for the chain to hang on to so that it's not hanging loosely off the hydrant. And this is just a little piece that has a hole in the end of it that will keep the chain where it should be. So I added that in and just started with a basic cube, and as you saw, I just extruded, and now I'm going to put that hole in the middle and start smoothing things out. All I did there was take one face, scaled it in after I extruded it, and then deleted it with the mirror modifier, and it gave me that hole in the middle of the object. So little tricks like that can really help when you start modeling. You just have to learn how to do things like that. And what I want to do is I want to keep some of those edges angular, so I'm adding those edges loops back in, but I also want to keep that hole in the middle as round as possible. So as you can see, I added those edge loops, but it was even all the way across. Now I'm having to move those back in to get those angles back out of that circle in the middle. So I'm trying to evenly spread around those edges in order to make that happen. And it's pretty good. One thing I will mention that I'm trying to do here, if you're modeling an object and you've got a bunch of stuff that is kind of laying on top of each other, and you're not going to see it because it's inside of something else, get rid of those faces. There's no reason to slow down your render time by keeping stuff in the inside of an object or in the background that's covered up you're never going to see. So if you can get rid of something, definitely get rid of it, because it's going to save you render time, it's going to save you processing power, and it's just not necessary. So that's going to be it for kind of that arm right there. Now I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to make a copy of it and rotate it around. What I've done is I've placed my 3D cursor in the middle, and then I'm rotating around the center of the model using the 3D cursor to realign the origin of that object. So when I rotate like that, it's going to rotate around the fire hydrant instead of the arm. And so really quickly, just add a little bit more complexity to this hydrant by making something work for me that I already did by duplicating it. What I'm doing now is I've gone into a second layer, and I'm building out a bolt so that I can attach that to part of the fire hydrant. So I started with a circle, extruded up, I'm adding edge loops, same process as always, getting that bolt looking shape down. And what I'm going to do now is I'm doing kind of a cool trick using a modifier we didn't discuss called screw. By taking a plane, I'm creating a silhouette, and what I'm going to do is try to create a screw by revolving this around and automatically extruding that with the modifier, and you'll see what happens. So it's going to allow me to control how many extrusions that I extrude out, and then by tweaking that silhouette, I can create a screw shape, as you see there. So a really handy modifier to get into. Definitely get in there and play around with the screw modifier. Now I'm not going to go in and add a bunch of detail because these are really, really tiny on the model. They're not going to be that big. So I'm going to combine them together after I apply the modifiers, scale them down, and again, they're going right there, so you're not going to see these. Even zoomed in, you're not going to see all the detail that you would normally add into the model. So I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to go in and make sure all the edges are smooth, and I'm just not, because it's a waste of time. You're never going to see that when you render it. So I'm taking that screw out, just like I just talked about, because you're not going to see it. Deleted that out of edit mode. And then I left it in the bottom part as if the screw is going all the way through the bottom of the model. And what I'm doing there is I'm just calculating how many degrees I need to go around when I duplicate this all the way around the model itself. So that was just duplication and then rotation. Nothing fancy. I'm taking the top part of those bolts, bringing them down to the bottom, and I'm going to scale them in a little bit, just make sure they fit on that bottom lip. And again, using what you already have to your advantage so that you don't have to sit there and rework something and waste more time. Being as efficient as possible is really going to speed you guys up. And if you guys get into doing this professionally, you're going to need to be as fast as you possibly can, because they're not going to wait around on you to say, I need 2 more days to finish this model. Well, you don't have 2 days. You've got to get it done. So learn to speed up by being working smarter rather than harder. Okay, let me explain what's going on here. I added another object to the scene called a Bezier curve, and it's basically just 2 points, and each point in 3D space has a handle on the end of it, and by tweaking those handles I can create a smooth curve in between the 2 points. So by adding that, what I've done is I've gone into the object settings for it in the far right, the properties panel. You can see I've gone to the curve settings, and I've created depth by turning up that bevel factor on the far right. You see depth over there? I've turned that up, cranked up the resolution, and what it'll do for me, it'll automatically generate sort of a tube shape around that curve. If I try to do this with a circle and just a mesh, I would have to sit there and extrude all of that stuff by hand, and then if I wanted to tweak it, it would take a lot longer than it should take. So what I've done is I've just used a trick with this curve to automatically add in some geometry for me. And just by starting off with that, if I want to go back in and make changes, all I really have to do is tweak those 2 points on the curve, and it's done. So I'm doing the same thing here. I duplicated that curve, created some more extrusions, and what I'm basically doing here is I'm building a chain. I'm building one link to a chain that I'm going to use to duplicate over and over again, and then we're going to use that to build the chain from that cap back to that part on the fire hydrant that I was talking about earlier. So again, just scaling those handles, rotating them in 3D space, making sure that everything's proportional and the right size. Taking my time to make sure everything's lined up, nothing's intersecting, chain isn't going through itself, things like that. And then once I do all that work up front, I can place this, and then right there, I'm changing the center of that object to be at the very top of that link by set origin, which is the button you see in the far left in the tool panel. There's a set origin drop down right there, and you can set it based on where your 3D cursor is. So as you can see, I moved the 3D cursor over, set my origin at the top of that link, and now when I duplicate it and I start adding more links into the chain, it's going to let me easily position those around by rotating based on the top of the link instead of the center of the link. And you'll see what I'm talking about in just a minute when we get into that. So wrapping up a hook on the end of that so the chain can be connected. And now I'm going to start making my chain. So I'm just basically duplicating this and then rotating it, sort of at 90 degrees each time in whatever axis I need to get these to be linked, and then curve them down and back up into that hook. And this is not a quick process, but it's also a lot less tedious than it would have been if I had to do this with those meshes like I was talking about. And bear in mind, I can still go back in and change the look of those links. And in fact, I didn't do this, but if you duplicated those links with Alt-D instead of Shift-D, I could probably go back in and just change one of the links, and it would change all the rest of them. So not a bad thing to try. If you guys get this model and you want to rebuild this chain, try that out. It'd be a great exercise for you guys to do. Just to learn how to place things accurately. And really, this is all about not making the chain look like it's awkwardly sitting at a weird angle in space. So I had to add a link there, kind of, finesse things into place to make sure that it felt like it was actually, there was some gravity there. So getting that last one in place, looks good. Okay, so now I'm going to duplicate part of those links over, and I'm going to just go ahead and start building the other chain using the pieces that I already have. And I'm going to connect it back to that first hook, and that's going to wrap it for the model. Again, it took an hour and a half, or maybe a little under an hour and a half to do the model, but it was pretty simple. There was some advanced stuff in there, as you guys can see, but nothing as complicated as organic modeling. I will mention that if you guys like this course, please definitely leave a comment, rate it for me. It goes a long way in helping me improve the course for you guys, add stuff to it to make it better, and then create more courses that are on topics you guys want to hear about. I will say I'm not an animator, I'm a modeler by trade. That's what I went to school for. So the next course I do, if it's with Blender, is probably going to be a course on modeling, some more advanced stuff. Again, it's all going to build off this course. So if you guys took this course and found it useful, and you want to get into doing more complicated stuff like people or cars and stuff like that, tell me what you want to learn, and I'll do my best to incorporate your suggestions into my next course. So there we go, connecting it up, making sure, again, it doesn't intersect, kind of looking at it from all angles to line things up, and that's going to wrap it, guys. So in the next lecture, we're going to start this next section on lighting, and I'm going to take what you've seen and build it into an environment, and we're going to light it. So I'll see you guys there.